Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this Your Overseas Home webinar. I hope that you can hear and see me okay. If we do have any internet connection issues today, I'll rejoin, but we do have Nicole here as well, who will be able to carry on with the presentation. Today we're going to be chatting with Nicole Sandler from Chase Buchanan about your financial considerations when you're thinking about moving across over to Spain. It's great to have you all here with us today, whether you're watching live or on demand. Nicole, before you start the presentation, please could you just introduce yourself and Chase Buchanan, kind of a bit of detail about what you actually do and how you can help. And then once we've done that, we'll move across to the actual presentation itself. And then from there, we'll open up the floor to all of your questions. So if you do have any questions as we go along, on the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a little tab saying questions. So please do type your questions in there. We'll try and get around to answering as many of them as possible. But if we don't, there will be some follow-up from Chase Buchanan and Nicole and the rest of the team after the event. So Nicole, I'll pass the floor across to you now. So if you mind just giving a quick introduction to yourself and then into the presentation.
Sure. Hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to present to you all this afternoon. So what I'll be discussing is tax in Spain for non-residents, and I've put in brackets there and residents as well, just because a lot of what I'm talking about actually crosses over for non-residents and residents. And more often than not, when people, for example, purchase a holiday home in Spain and they start to spend more time in Spain, very typically they then consider becoming a Spanish resident. So to cover both bases, I thought I would include the information for both. And I'm Nicole Sandler. I'm a private wealth manager for Chase Buchanan, Private Wealth Management. I do actually have an introduction slide if you go through where I can very briefly just explain who I am and what I do.
Sure, Nicole. Do you know what? I'll go through. Do you know whereabouts it is?
That's it. There I am. So as I said, I'm a private wealth manager for Chase Buchanan, and they're a global and independent wealth management company. You've probably noticed from my twangy accent, I'm from Australia originally. But I've lived in Spain for over 9 years now. I'm in a rather small coastal town called Javia, which is on the Costa Blanca in between Valencia and Alicante, just across from Ibiza. And I very much help foreign nationals navigate through the complexities and challenges of moving to Spain for those who do want to move to Spain, and also for individuals who already live here in Spain. And before I lived here, I was actually a financial planner in the UK. I worked for a really large wealth management firm there for 8 years. So I'm very much a cross-border specialist between the UK and Spain. But in saying that, I've got lots of foreign nationals as clients, predominantly British nationals, but not necessarily. So just to say, I'm a financial planner, so I'm not a property specialist or a property consultant. However, as I say, I've been here for over 9 years, so I've built up some really useful contacts in Spain. So if you do need anything in relation to property, mortgages, a Spanish accountant, a lawyer, for example, you're very welcome to reach out and contact me, and I can point you in the right direction depending on where in Spain you're considering buying a property, or if you're moving to Spain, I can point you in the right direction for whoever it is that you need. And I just thought I'd say I'm really happy to extend the invitation of a complimentary financial review if anybody is considering or weighing up whether they'd like to be a Spanish tax resident and you want to understand more about how that would affect your own personal situation. You're really welcome to contact me. I'll put my contact details at the end, and I'll reach out to you after the webinar anyway, and you're very welcome to have a free consultation with me. So Seb, do I have control, or is it you of the slides?
I have control, but I think you should also, Nicole, I don't know if you can move them. You should be able to use your keyboard and press the right arrow button.
Sorry, there I am. I'll stick to my day job and nothing technical. Sorry. So I think the best place to start is to talk about the Spanish tax year and residency, because this is really important if you plan to stay non-resident or if you're considering becoming a Spanish resident. It's really important to understand the residency rules for either way. So probably the only simple thing about Spanish taxation is that the tax year is a calendar year. So it's the 1st of January to the 31st of December. And then Spain is split into 17 different autonomous regions, and they all do their own thing from a tax point of view. So it's really important to know where in Spain you're looking to move or purchase a second property, because the tax regime of that region could be really different to another one. But I wouldn't let tax dictate your life choices at the same time, because what the tax rates are today, they could be completely different, in a few months' time or a few years' time. So some people say, well, which is the best tax region of Spain? And it could be totally irrelevant, because they do change, and it can be quite radical with the tax changes here. So I think it's best to pick which region of Spain suits you for your personal objectives, and the tax should follow secondary to that, in my personal opinion. Then if you're not a Spanish resident and you're not from within the European Union, you're probably already aware of this 90-day rule, whereby you can spend up to 90 days within a 180-day period in Spain. So it's really important to keep track of that, and perhaps a slight buffer zone just in case. Then if you're from within the EU but not from Spain, you can spend up to 183 days. If you want to become a Spanish tax resident, you would then, and you're not from the EU, you would then need to look at different visa options to do that, to move to Spain. So with residency, you're deemed to be a Spanish tax resident if you spend more than 183 days, which is 6 months or more, in a calendar year in Spain. So it's important to count those days. But it's not just about the length of time that you spend here. It's also about your center of economic interest. So if you had a job based in Spain, that can actually make you a Spanish tax resident automatically. Or perhaps if you had family or a spouse that are based in Spain, that can also automatically make you a Spanish tax resident. So if you're an offshore worker, for example. So I think that's a starting point, because it's something you need to be aware of if you don't want to be resident. And if you do want to be resident, when in the year that you move to Spain, the first half or the second half, very much will dictate your tax for that year. And then your fiscal obligations in Spain, if you're non-resident or if you're resident, is that you would be subject to income tax, capital gains tax, something called wealth tax, which is very unpopular. And then if you're a Spanish tax resident, there's a reporting declaration called the Modelo 720. And all it is, it's an overseas asset reporting form that tells Spain any assets that you have outside of Spain. As I say, that's only for Spanish tax residents though. And then there's something called succession tax, which is like inheritance tax in Spain. And it works in the complete opposite way than it does to most other countries, especially Commonwealth type countries like the UK, for example. And again, that's relevant for non-residents and residents. So I'll come to explain these sort of relevant taxes as we walk through the presentation. So if you do want to purchase a property in Spain, there's several taxes to be aware of. And it depends on whether you're buying a new home, so something that's never been lived in before, and perhaps you're purchasing directly from a developer, for example, or if you're purchasing a second-hand property that's changed hands at least once before, including bank repossessions. So these are regional rules as well. So the tax rates will vary quite considerably in some cases, depending on which region of Spain that you live in. So just generically speaking, in high level detail, new builds in Spain will have a VAT of 10% plus stamp duty. And the stamp duty is what differs region to region, but it could be anywhere up to 1.5% as the maximum. And then if you're purchasing a second-hand property, then there's something called a transfer tax, and that could be anywhere between 8% to 10% because it depends on the property value. And then there's other fees to consider here, such as notary fees, land registry fees, legal fees, estate agent fees. There's something called a HESTOR. The G is pronounced like a H, and that's like an accountancy type fee, which most people would use. It's like an administrator that would help coordinate the entire purchase. Then on top of that, you could even have banking fees and mortgage-related fees. But generically speaking, you would expect to pay anywhere between 8% up to 13% in taxes and fees on a property purchase in Spain. And if you do need to seek a mortgage, typically the banks in Spain will lend up to 80%. So you would need to have a 20% deposit plus, 13% potentially in fees and taxes. So 33% you would need to have in cash to purchase a property. So that's the property related taxes. And then we'll come to income tax. So if you are living in Spain as a Spanish resident, you're subject to tax on your worldwide income and gains, and you submit something called a Modelo 100. And just to say, I know in other countries, especially the UK, it's really easy to submit tax returns online and to do them yourself. If you're purchasing property in Spain and you plan to be non-resident, or if you're planning to move to Spain, I would heavily encourage you to use a HESTOR or an accountant. As I say, a HESTOR is like an administrator stroke bookkeeper, and accountant is similar. And they will submit your non-resident tax returns or your resident tax returns and all of the necessary declarations. I mean, I live and breathe Spanish taxes every day with my job, and I use an accountant for everything that I do. I would not recommend to do it yourself. Plus the rates change all the time and things aren't really promoted. So it would just give you peace of mind if you do use an accountant. As I say, I can point you in that direction if need be. If you're not a Spanish tax resident, then only any Spanish sourced income is subject to tax in Spain. So for example, if you purchase a holiday home here and you rent it out, the rental income is subject to income tax here in Spain, and you need to submit the tax return each year. And with income tax, it's split into two different camps: the general rates of income tax and the savings rates of income tax. The general rates will include rental income, pension income, any earned income like salaries, and then the savings rates are things like investment income and capital gains tax. And I'll show you what the rates are in a moment. And the general rates of income tax are regional, so they will vary region to region by a few percent. And then the state rules are the savings rates of income tax, including capital gains. That's driven centrally by the Madrid government, and it's the same anywhere in Spain. So if you're not a Spanish tax resident, you need to submit something called a Modelo, which is just like a form, Modelo 210, and that's paid at the end of the following year if you're not a resident. So it would be due any time up until the end of next year based on all of 2023. As I say, for residents, it's by the end of June the following year. So I've mentioned they vary region to region with income tax. The state rules are anywhere between 19 to 47% at the top rate. And just a couple of examples: in Andalusia in the south of Spain, the top rate's 47%. It's quite a progressive tax region. And where I am in Comunidad Valenciana, the top rate is now 54%. But that's only for incomes greater than 300,000, which affects a small percentage of the population. If you are a Spanish tax resident, you're also entitled to a personal allowance of 5,550 euros, and it's also subject to additional allowances as well in some circumstances. If you're a Spanish tax resident, these are the savings income, including capital gains tax rates, and they will range from 19 to 28%. So if you do live in Spain more than 6 months a year, this is what you would be paying if you sold a property, for example, or had investment-related income. If you're not a Spanish tax resident, say you purchase a property in Spain and you decide to sell it and you're not resident, then if you're part of the EU, you pay a flat rate tax of 19%. And if you're from outside of the EU, it's a flat rate tax of 24%. So that's for non-Spanish residents. You're doing well if you're keeping up, because I'm conscious I'm rattling through quite quickly, and it's tax. And then we've got something which isn't so popular here. This is regional wealth taxes. In some regions of Spain, this is due. So non-residents will only pay wealth tax on Spanish situated assets. Spanish residents pay it on their worldwide assets. And they look at the value as at the 31st of December each year, and the tax is due the following year. It's payable on a sliding scale from 0.25% up to 3.5%. And if you're a non-resident or a resident, you have a personal allowance of 700,000 euros. This is regional. So, for example, where I am on the Costa Blanca in Comunidad Valenciana, it's 500,000 euros, and that's the same in Catalonia. So it can vary greatly, but the state rule is 700,000 euros. You only pay wealth tax if you exceed that. So you only pay it on the excess over the allowance. If you do live in Spain and you're a Spanish resident, you also have a main home allowance of 300,000 euros. And they've effectively eliminated wealth tax in Murcia, Andalusia, and it's been exempt in Madrid for quite some time. All the politicians live in Madrid, so it's a good tax region. But this is very much a regional tax. And as I say, it's not applicable to everybody. So this is succession tax, which is inheritance tax in Spain. And this definitely applies to non-residents and residents, because when it applies is if the beneficiary lives in Spain or if the asset is physically based in Spain. So if you have a Spanish property, for example, it's a Spanish asset, so it will attract succession tax. Or if you live in Spain or you have children or whoever the beneficiaries are that live in Spain, because they're Spanish residents, they will pay succession tax. And in Spain, it's the beneficiary that picks up the tax bill. In the UK, for example, it's deducted from the deceased estate. But if you have a property, for example, a holiday home in Spain, and the beneficiaries are your children that live anywhere outside of Spain, because they're inheriting a Spanish property, they're the ones that have to pay the tax, and you have to pay it within 6 months in Spain, and they have to have the cash available. You can't sell a property and then use the proceeds to pay the tax. So it's quite a ruthless tax, in my opinion. We don't have death taxes in Australia, so I find it particularly unfair. So it's just be aware of that. Estate planning in Spain is really important, because the beneficiary is the one that's picking up the tax bill. There are exemptions, rates, and multipliers. It's quite a complicated calculation, and it all depends on the closeness of the relationship to the deceased. Spouses and children will typically have greater allowances. So there are ways to minimize succession tax, because they do provide allowances and reductions in each region of Spain. The standard tax rates for succession tax range anywhere between 7 up to 34%. And then there's a multiplier effect. And then, as I say, they can reduce the amount of tax if it's a close relation. I'll show you the beneficiaries on the next slide. And this is a very regional tax. So, for example, in Andalusia, they have an allowance of 1 million euros. Where I am, it's currently 100,000 euros. But there is a very recent update for this region, and also in the Balearic Islands, that they're actually looking to completely eliminate succession tax for spouses and children, which will be amazing. But this is quite important to think about, I think, as I say, because if you do have a property in Spain, your beneficiaries will be faced with succession tax. And they group them into 4 different categories, the beneficiaries. So direct descendants and spouses will have the most amount of allowances. If it's a brother or sister or more of a distant relative, including step parents and children, they have lesser allowances. Usually it's only around 8,000 euros. And for non-blood relatives, they have no allowances at all. So I specialize a lot on estate planning in Spain. So if anybody has questions on that, just let me know. It's quite complicated. Spanish will. So if you do purchase a property here, if you have any assets in Spain, you should also have a Spanish will just to look after the property in Spain. You should have a will in any country, where you have assets. And if you have assets in several countries, no problem, but you should have a local will in each one of those countries. Keep the will updated, and it's really, really important, and it's really quick and easy to do. You just go directly to a notary in Spain to draft it, and it will speed up and simplify the probate process, because if you do have a property here without a will, it's a real mess, and it's very unfair, to family or whoever it is, because they need to then battle it out with a legal system in a foreign language, and it's just so simple to set up a will. So when you purchase a property, the lawyer that will be involved can set it up for you, or just go directly to the notary. But I'm sure they will prompt you on that whilst you're there. Just to say some pitfalls to avoid. So I know these next two slides are very much tilted towards people thinking about becoming Spanish residents, but there's some really important points if you are in that camp, and there's a lot of tax considerations that take place. So just for example, from a UK perspective, if you have ISAs or national savings and investment products, they're not tax efficient at all in Spain, and they're tax-free in the UK. So a conversation around that needs to take place. If you have offshore bonds or any investments that are set up, highly likely they won't be Spanish tax compliant, and you could end up being taxed really highly in Spain. So you need to consider what to do before you lose your current residency, wherever that may be. Also on the UK side of things, if you are looking to move here, usually people will sell the main home before they lose their UK residency, because it's free of capital gains tax. If you sold it as a Spanish resident, it's fully subject to capital gains tax, and in both countries. Pensions, if you're thinking about moving to Spain and you have a pension, the tax-free lump sum is only tax-free in the UK, and it's fully subject to tax in Spain. Also, Spain don't recognise trusts, which it's too detailed to go through, but trusts are a common law subject, and this is a civil law country, and those two worlds collide from a tax perspective. So what I'm basically trying to showcase with this slide and the previous one is to seek financial advice before you make any decisions. If you can leave 12 months as a time frame before you move, that's great, or any time in particular is helpful, because there's great tax planning opportunities to take advantage of, and you can save a lot of tax before you move if you do move, if you seek the right advice. Also, if you do live in the UK, your financial advisor there can't provide you with any advice from a regulation perspective post-Brexit. So as soon as you're non-UK resident, if you do move, that's something else to consider. So I won't go into more detail on that. It's basically what I've just explained. Just seek advice, because it is really complicated, but it doesn't need to be. If you do want to move to Spain, you can actually do it in a really tax efficient and simple manner, and I can explain an end-to-end process for you to do that. And there's my contact details. I'm also really active on LinkedIn. I try and do a lot of educational videos about Spain and taxes and investments. I find it interesting, but it's probably not. But you're very welcome to take a look and contact me if you would like a consultation with me. Sorry, I'm conscious I've spoken really quickly, but I know there's a lot to go through.
No, amazing, Nicole. Yeah, thank you. There's a lot to go through, and I think you went through it really, really well. Some really important topics covered within there, and as I've been on LinkedIn and seen some of Nicole's videos, and I can confirm they are really informative and they are great. So I do advise you guys to go across to LinkedIn or elsewhere to look at that if you have any other questions or want some more information. What we're doing now, though, so Nicole, we'll move across to some questions from the audience. We've had a couple that have come through as you've been presenting. So thank you very much for submitting your questions. Please do continue to do that. I don't know if you can see them, Nicole, but I'll start picking some out that I can put to you, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I know you mentioned towards the end of your presentation around selling a property in the UK and perhaps being taxed both in the UK and in Spain. We've got a message here from Suzanne saying that she's hoping to sell the UK property this year and retire to Spain in the second half of 2024. Are there any exceptions to the capital gains tax if we cannot sell our UK home until next year, or would we need to push our plans plans back another year?
The short answer is yes, there are exceptions. This was up for debate slightly post-Brexit, but it depends on your age. And feel free to contact me afterwards, because there's a capital gains tax rule if you're over 65 in Spain or under 65. If all the planets align, and I know it's really difficult with interest rates on the UK side of things, especially at the moment, but ideally if you do sell it first and then move to Spain, especially with the timings you've suggested, that's perfect. If you can't sell it, then if you're below the age of 65, there's something called reinvestment relief. So if you sell a home and then within 2 years buy another main home in Spain or the EU, you can apply what's called a reinvestment relief to eliminate capital gains tax, or at least reduce it, depending on the new property price. If you're over 65, then as a Spanish resident, selling your main home is free of capital gains tax. So feel free to touch base with me about that afterwards. But there are exceptions, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And yeah, Suzanne, we'll put you guys in touch with one another after the event. And I think it's important to speak to Chase or Nicole directly as early as possible. To really get the most informative information to help you on your journey. We've got another question here from Clive. It's focusing on pension. So Clive asked if he's in receipt of a UK state pension and also a UK civil service pension, is it correct that he will be taxed in the UK instead of being taxed in Spain?
So I assume, is this if you're a Spanish tax resident? So if you're a Spanish tax resident, the pensions would be paid gross, so no tax deducted, and you would pay tax in Spain only. So it would be subject to the general rates of income tax in Spain. You can continue having that paid to a UK bank account, for example, if you wanted to, or you could actually have it paid to a Spanish bank account. But just with the civil service pensions, it depends on what type it is. Because some of them are tax exempt in the UK, and it can still be tax exempt in Spain. However, the accountant will add it to your income tax calculation, which more often than not will push you up into a higher bracket. So it can still be tax exempt, but you have to include it in your income tax return. But essentially, if you're a Spanish tax resident, you pay tax in Spain on your UK pension income.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Clive. Thanks, Nicole. I've got one here from Danielle asking on an NDV, will I pay into my pension as normal with my UK employer? ? Are there any penalties?
Sorry, just look.
Danielle Lloyd.
I think digital nomad visa probably on that one. So will I pay into my pension as normal? No. So if you're not a UK resident, you won't have any tax relief from paying in the contributions. So you won't have penalties, but you wouldn't have tax relief if you're no longer UK resident. So you can pay into it, but you've got no tax relief. There could be other more tax efficient options for you to look at if you are a Spanish tax resident and if you plan to stay. So it really depends on your personal objectives, I think. Again, I can pick that up with you one-on-one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good idea. So there's another question from Danielle there as well around UK second home stamp duty applicable if this second home is in Spain without selling the UK home. So it may be best, Danielle, to have a one-on-one conversation after this webinar to go through it in a bit more detail. We've got one here from Omar. So Omar says that he's a French citizen living in the UK. He has settled status. Does the 183-day rule still apply for him? Do you know, Nicole?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a general rule of thumb for everybody. So if you're an EU citizen, which you are, you can spend, you need to spend just less of 183 days in Spain if you don't want to be a Spanish tax resident. If you do want to be a Spanish tax resident, you would need to spend 183 days or more. So less than 6 months if you don't want to be tax resident, more than 6 months if you do want to be a Spanish tax resident.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, thanks a lot, Nicole. We'll just go up one by one. So we've got a couple more that have come in. This one's from Dan, saying thank you so much so far. But he asks, given the oppressive taxation in Spain, what what incentives exist for wage earners looking to expatriate to Spain?
Sorry, I'm just reading it at the same time. What incentives exist for wage earners looking? Yeah, on that, I know Spain has a really bad stigma attached to it. It sounds really daunting from a tax point of view. They've made it quite complicated and it all sounds quite strict, and there's taxes that don't exist in other countries that exist here. Just to say, if you can set yourself up to live quite tax efficiently in Spain. Also, the cost of living is so much less. So I think people just focus a lot on taxes, but you do need to consider that the cost of living is so much less, certainly from the UK and many other European countries. So it does help even it out somewhat. But yeah, I mean, it really depends on your situation. There are reductions and allowances and incentives, but it does depend on your personal situation. So again, it probably requires a conversation with myself and probably also a Spanish accountant.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot to think about. If you are thinking about working overseas, do get those questions answered before, so you're aware, or of what you can do. We've got another one here from Anthony Wilson. We've got a time for a couple more, but Anthony asked if he were to sell his UK home and bought a residential home on a residential campsite, would he be liable to tax? I presume so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just looking at the same time. So if you sold your UK home and bought a residential home, yeah. So if you sold your UK home and you bought a residential home in Spain, you'd be subject to tax in Spain if you're resident or non-resident, because you'd be purchasing a Spanish asset. You'll be subject to tax in Spain, but then it depends on how long, if you're planning to become a Spanish tax resident or not. But if you're selling the UK home, going back to the first few slides, it's really important that you get the residency and timings right. If you do sell it and plan to then move to Spain, have a conversation with me, because I can explain when in the year it would make sense to move to Spain and the best strategy to do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nicole. So we've got one here that hopefully can answer fairly quickly. It's around how old someone needs to be in order to own a property in Spain. I believe it's 18, but I don't know if you know.
I was going to say my understanding is 18. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, great stuff. So we've got a few more just come through. Dan again asks that he's heard that there is a 5-year non-habitual resident tax break. Is that correct?
This might be in relation to the Beckham rule for the non-lucrative, the digital nomad visa.
Okay.
Where for 5 years, if you do get that, it's fantastic. This is the new, sorry if this isn't the answer, but if you're talking about the non-lucrative visa, you can apply for something called the Beckham law or the Beckham rule. And it's not an automatic right, which people don't realize. You have to apply for it. And if you do get that, you're essentially taxed as a non-resident for 5 years, which is fantastic. It's probably as good as it can get from a tax perspective. And in fact, that might go back to the other, sorry, I now forget the name, but the last question about, are there any incentives for people earning? Yeah, I mean, if you're not an EU citizen and you can come under the digital nomad visa and get the Beckham law, it's a really great tax position to be in.
Okay, brilliant.
Sorry if that didn't answer your question.
No, it's really, I did not know that either. So yeah, thank you very much, Nicole. So that's kind of all we've got about time for this afternoon. What we'll do is, I know there's a couple of questions that are in there that have not been answered, so I do apologise, but we will pass all of those across to Nicole and the Chase Buchanan team to follow up with you all. And yeah, just to reiterate the point, all of your plans are unique and individual. They will require sort of a tailored approach. And the more time you have, the better when it comes down to buying a property overseas. So we do really advise everyone getting in touch with Nicole or a member of the Chase Buchanan team as soon as possible. They've helped countless amounts of our clients and others' clients on their journey overseas to Spain, and they'll be happy to help you with yours. So yeah, I'd just like to say thank you, Nicole, for your time, the information, All of this session will be held online and on demand on our website. So if you did like to share it with any friends or family or colleagues, yeah, please do so. And then we will be also sending across a follow-up email with all of the details for Nicole. So if you'd like to get in contact with her directly, please do so. But yeah, thank you very much, Nicole, and yeah, everyone viewing on demand.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nicole. Take care.